Monza, the Temple of Speed, sets the stage for the Week 4 showdown. Flat-out straights, heavy braking zones and iconic corners reward courage and precision as our SDRL drivers chase glory and points in Italy. Our reserve driver lineup starts with GB at Red Bull, Tob Lobster at Alpine, Xbox at VCarb and then Mo in at Williams. The single quali session warmed up with a sequence of low 118s, topped by Max Bean with 118.0, Berkey, GB and Alex behind, each separated by 0.04 of a second. But, as ever, Barbant was on hand to blow open the party, recording a 117.3, which would go on to be the pole time. From there, everyone kept their powder dry for the post-flag flying lap. Mars haloed into P2 with a 117.8, while Max Bean improved his time to 117.9 but dropped to P3. Berkey improved by 1/10, taking P4 but couldn't break 118, and GB didn't improve on his time but held on to P5. Looking at the grid lineup, tyres are an easy eyeball. Everyone on mediums save for Shuri running a hard strategy. Barbant and Mars occupy the front row, although as is often the case, P2 seems to have the favourable line to turn 1, given a good start. Second row, Max and Berkey look hard to beat. On the third row, GB and Alex had impressive speed in quali. Fourth row is Bradders and Epa Ake, both looking capable this season. And fifth row, Mo and Sert. The launch was clean with Mars and Barbant wheel to wheel through the first 2 turns. Barbant briefly had the advantage, emerging to turn 3. Mars had held on to the inside line and spun up ERS to take the lead. Behind them, Max Bean and Berkey swapped places several times. Bradders moved up to P7. And Max Bean and Berkey swapped places several more times. Bradders and Alex swapped places for P6 through turn 5 and then swapped back coming into Lesmo 1. Heading into lap 2, Mars had the lead over Barbant, Berkey over Max Bean, and both GB and Alex held on to their starting positions. At turn 1 of lap 2, either Berkey or Barbant hit the brakes late, which brought them together and spun Berkey enough to drop him 3 places. GB improved to P3 with an impressive overtake on Max Bean through Parabolica, in the process clocking the fastest lap of 121.2. Anyone wondering where the dominant McLarens of the past races were need look no further than lap 3, as Takubi moved to P10 from his starting position of P18. He took Epa Ake through turn 1, then chased down Bradders out of Roger for P9. By the time Takubi rounded out of Ascari the same lap, he'd passed Bradders in the Ferrari and Mo in the Williams. Kicking into lap 8, Takubi then moved into P5. A lap later, the other McLaren of Orax made the move to P7, his ascent up the grid only slightly behind Takubi's. Coming into lap 10, Barbant made his move on Mars, sweeping past and into P1 for turn 1. With Barbant pushing to shut down DRS for Mars, both drivers on warm mediums were perilously close to a puncture, especially given everyone back from P5 had already pitted. Mars came around Parabolica end of lap 10 in P2, clinging to DRS behind Barbant's. He headed into the pits, the gap back to P4 a whopping 14 seconds. No need to push the pit entry to its limits, you'd think. Mars picked up a 10-second penalty. Mars and his weekly issues with the pit seems to be a feature of this series. By lap 15, all pit stops were done, and some semblance of order had settled into the grid. Although the rapidly accumulating penalties up and down the timing tower would make predicting final positions difficult. Mars on his new tyres had leapt into the lead after his stop, a tow from his teammate Berkey setting him on his way. By lap 17, Berkey was now channeling his inner Sonny Hayes, trying to slow down the pack to help Mars build a delta to cover his 10-second penalty. This was great teamwork from Mercedes and fascinating to watch from the stands. While Berkey was Takubi's problem up front, Barbant was constantly challenging him from behind. We have learned though, if there's one driver capable of holding off Barbant, it's Takubi. Once more, Berkey defended into turn 1 of lap 18, with Takubi, Barbant and GB stacked up behind. Alex was 5 seconds further back in P6 and the rest of the grid strung out around the circuit. In perhaps the move of the day, GB took both Barbans and Takubi in one overtake approaching the first chicane. Maybe GB would succeed taking down Berkey where Takubi and Barbans had failed. While GB closed on Berkey, Barbans made his move on Takubi around Parabolica lap 20, a move he completed coming into the straight. The beginning of lap 21 saw the thrills go through the roof, with Takubi taking back P4 from Barbans and GB finally taking Berkey. Would the move stick this time? Somehow Berkey fought back for his P2 and Barbans took back P4 courtesy of a brief dip of a wheel into gravel by Takubi. With all this hard racing and still 5 laps remaining, it looked like some of these tyres might be driven into puncture range. Would the fear of a puncture slow any of the leaders down? Would it have them accept what they have? Take the points they have and jump on that private jet home? Of course not. Barbans challenged GB into Parabolica and GB went for Berkey into turn 1 of lap 23. They briefly came together. Berkey stuck to the inside line out of turn 2 and pulled back the lead through turn 3, as had been his signature through this race. Lap 24, Berkey's heroics were starting to impact his tyres and his ability to fight for position. Although Mars had managed to pull a delta of 8 seconds, he needed another 2 seconds to cover off GB and Barbans. And it was now that GB completed his move into P2 around Berkey. Berkey fought hard to take back P2 and may even have picked up a puncture running into the grass towards Parabolica. He would immediately peel into the pits for fresh hards. Of course, Barbans was in no mood to stick on his net P2, even with tyres on 70% wear. He took GB for the net P1 into turn 1 of lap 26. For Mars, the podium top step would now need punctures from both GB and Barbans, which at this juncture seemed quite possible. Sadly for Mars, that was not to be the case. Mars would take the flag and ultimately P3 with penalty adjustments. Takubi came in P4, having fallen off the pace the last few laps and nursing a penalty of his own. P1 then would go to Barbans with a well-deserved P2 for GB on his debut. Mars P3 and Takubi P4. Max Beam would take a well-earned P5, 5 seconds ahead of a very consistent Sert in P6. Aurochs would take P7, Berkey still managed points in P8, despite his heroics costing him a late pit stop. A race where he had a viable chance at the podium without his own pit penalty. Rounding out the points we have Shuri and a second consecutive points tally for Josh, as always demonstrating that first you have to finish. Xbox and then Rando were the last of the finishers, with punctures adding to a DNF tally that equalled last week's Baku. Time to breathe. What a race. Easily the most thrilling of this season from this seat in the stands. Looking at the Drivers' Championship, Takubi's lead atop the table reminds us of Barbans' lead last season. If Takubi can get to the grid each week, it seems his to lose. Likewise, Barbans on the grid is always going to be a threat on track, while making a race thrilling for the audience. Aurochs has been excellent for his P3. Max, Sert and Nick have all been consistently impressive. It's difficult to look past the combination of Takubi and Aurochs at McLaren for the constructors. As ever, the title is dependent on consistent points each week. Aston are certainly poised to take advantage of any slip-up. That rounds out SDRL Season 8, Week 4. Coming up, we have the sweeping dunes, relentless banking and narrow straights of Zandvoort. See you there.